All right, everyone, welcome to the Rise and Progress for February. If you were here in January, you'll know that all this year our programs are themed around America 250 themes. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Michigan's constitutions and constitutional conventions because, yes, states have constitutions too. It is required for you to have a constitution in order to be a state. And Michigan has actually had 4 of them, though we've tried to have 6. So we had 6 conventions resulting in 4 different constitutions. I'm going to briefly go through each of those, talk about the major provisions in them, who are the players within the conventions, who are making our constitutions, because constitutions say a lot about who we are and the principles we think are important. They organize government, and they can also tell us a lot about our history by going back and looking at previous constitutions. So where do we begin? Well, let's begin with the Northwest Ordinance. One moment here, which is outlining how this Northwest Territory is to become states. So Northwest Ordinance says a few things. One, not less than 3 nor more than 5 states will be made out of that area. Now you'll see here this comprises of what is currently Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and a little bit of Minnesota. That'll break off later and not cause too much of an issue. But it also says, whenever any of the said states shall have 60,000 free inhabitants therein, such state shall be admitted by its delegates into the Congress of the United States, provided the Constitution and government so to be formed shall be Republican and in conformity with the principles contained in these articles. So they're saying, if you want to be a state, you have to have 60,000 people, you have to have a constitution. So 1835, Michigan decides we want to take that step. We have 60,000 people. We are going to write our Constitution. Now, one little difference, though, because Michigan does not follow the example set by some of our other states and petition Congress or wait for approval from Congress. We petition Congress for permission to write a Constitution, and we wait, and we wait, and we wait. And then we get impatient and we say, we're writing a Constitution anyways. Nothing says we actually have to wait for approval. So that is what we do. And the resulting Constitution will be the Constitution of 1835. Now, this was authorized by the Legislative Council, which was the territorial legislator. This was a unicameral legislator. When you're a territory, there are just different rules. So we only have one chamber. They are the Legislative Council. They authorize a constitutional convention, but they don't necessarily set out all of the requirements for what that convention is going to look like. Now, the convention is held in the First Capitol in Detroit in the Legislative Council chamber, which would be on the first floor, so just up the stairs inside those doors. It's held from May 11th through June 24th of 1835. As the delegates did not meet on Sundays, this means it lasted for 38 total session days, meeting days. The delegates to the convention were largely inexperienced. No one there had really ever written a constitution before. Not surprising, considering this is our first one. But this means that when delegates show up, they all have all of these ideas of what they want in the Constitution or what they don't want in the Constitution, but there's no document they're working off of. Later constitutions, we will have our previous constitution, and we can say, we like this provision, we don't like that one, this is how we want to restructure. They're starting from scratch. They do use a few other constitutions as models, but it's evident pretty early on that not much is happening for about the first 10 days because nobody has something to work off of. So a committee of 19 is formed to draft a constitution to use as the basis. Those who have done committee work might realize that 19 is kind of unwieldy for a committee. So secretly, 5 delegates sneak off, they write a draft constitution, skip a few session days, show up and say, here's what we're working off of. We've got something to work off of. So this is how this constitution is going to happen. But who are these delegates? So first of all, delegates will have 89 total delegates to the Constitutional Convention, and Michigan is very different at this point in time. One thing to notice, population distribution is going to be very different. Counties are different than what they are today. In fact, if you look, Mackinac and Chippewa counties are the upper half of the Lower Peninsula, and all the Upper Peninsula, 2 counties. So it's a little bit of a different makeup. And then if we're looking at the actual people, first of all, the statistics here for this constitutional convention actually include 2 additional delegates. There were 2 contested seats. So when I ran some statistics, I tried to do it for everyone because even those contested seats, both of the delegates on either side did vote on at least 1 or 2 issues, mainly who should be seated, because we have to figure these things out. We've not done this before. In at least one of the situations, the contested seat was a literal tie in the district, and they ended up having to rerun the election. So that seat was a little bit up in the air for a few days. They let both people vote for a while and then seated the one who wins in the next election. So most delegates are farmers. They are overwhelmingly Democrat. But the thing to know at the time is that there are actually 2 large Democrat factions within Michigan at the time. There are liberal Democrats and then there are conservative Democrats, and they basically win about an equal number of seats. It's almost a 40-40 split between the 2. So the Whigs actually end up with a decent amount of power because they're stepping in and they're able to take one side or the other and kind of support in that way. Now, the delegates were mostly born in New York, but we do see some other eastern states pretty high up there with number of delegates. They're mostly married, and were mostly in their 30s or 40s at the time. Now, as we go through, because statistics are great and all, but who are these people? I'm going to highlight 3 delegates from each of our conventions. So starting off here, I want to talk a little bit about Father John Pierce. He was born in Chesterfield, New Hampshire. He goes to seminary before coming to Michigan as a missionary. Now, he is very interested in education. This is the thing that he wants to reform. He wants to bring forward in Michigan above all things. So he helps write that education section of Michigan's Constitution. He serves as Michigan's first superintendent of public instruction, and he's also on the 1850 Con, which we'll talk about in just a few moments. And while sits on that constitutional convention, he also helps draft the education article. Michael Dousman was born in Pittsburgh. He becomes a trapper and fur trader on Mackinac Island. He's there during the War of 1812 and is actually captured by the British. After promising not to fight against the British, he is paroled. After the end of the War of 1812, he swears fealty back to the United States, and he is allowed to continue being a fur trader, but he has to work under the American Fur Company, which is John Jacob Astor's company, if you're familiar with that name. But he was also a farmer and mill owner on Mackinac Island. And then we have Peter Van Every. He was born in Ontario, Canada, and he was a private during the War of 1812. So a lot of these early delegates are going to have some kind of connection to the War of 1812. He was a farmer. He owned a 400-acre farm in Hamtramck and also ran a hotel. He was a member of the Legislative Council, so had a little bit of legislative experience. And then after the convention, he's going to actually be elected to the first House of Representatives in 1835. And this is important because delegates that were then elected are actually going to pass legislation implementing some of the things outlined within the Constitution. Now, also as we go through, I'm going to kind of point out our list of committees because we can find out a lot about what these conventions were talking about by what committees they had breaking off to discuss different issues. And I do want to highlight in our 1835 convention, the Disputed Boundary Committee. This is because we still have not quite settled where Michigan's border is compared to Ohio. This is the Toledo War. We are at odds with Ohio. And actually, this gets to the point where this committee is going to draft resolutions. They're going to send them off to Congress. And this was actually really overstepping. The Legislative Council, along with not giving them really any rules, they started taking on some of the responsibilities that should have been more delegated to the Legislative Council. So it's a little bit of a looser convention in that regards. So what are our key provisions? What does our Constitution look like? First of all, it starts out right off the bat with a Bill of Rights. This is different from the U.S. Constitution, which the Bill of Rights was added on in order to allow that to pass. We put that right up at the front. Voting is allowed to vote are free white males over 21. This is going to be a change from the Northwest Ordinance because the Northwest Ordinance actually required you to own property. So we are expanding voting a little bit. Obviously not to the extent we have it today, but this is a step forward. In terms of the executive, the governor and lieutenant governor are elected to 2-year terms, and they are required to have resided in Michigan territory for 5 years. And then the governor is in charge of a lot of appointments at this point. The Secretary of State, Auditor General, Attorney General, county prosecuting attorneys, and the superintendent of public instruction are all appointed positions. In terms of the legislator, the House is elected to 1-year terms, and there will be between 48 and 100 members of the House of Representatives. The Senate has 2-year terms, half of the members expiring each year, and their number is set at 1/3 the number of the House delegates. So we don't have a specific number there. There is a salary cap for legislators of $3 per day. And then if we look at our judicial branch, we have a Supreme Court appointed to 7-year terms by the governor. Education, as I mentioned, was really important to Father Pierce, but it's also really important here because we have some pretty novel things within our Constitution. We set up a Constitution that requires the state to provide education for the people of Michigan. This is set up on a township model where a certain section of each township is set aside to fund, the sale of which will fund a primary school fund, and that would pay for education. We also have that position of superintendent of public instruction right in our Constitution. So we are not the first state to have a superintendent of public instruction, but we are the first one to put it in our Constitution. So a lot of those states who had superintendents before we did, they actually get rid of them. But it's a lot harder to do in Michigan because it's in our Constitution. Now, in terms of amending, how would we change this Constitution? Either chamber can vote, and with 2/3 vote, refer a change to the next legislative session. That is then put on a ballot for the people to vote. Then it's a majority vote of the people. Same thing if you want to call a constitutional convention, the legislator votes on it, puts it on the ballot, then the people can say yes or no. This Constitution passes by a vote of 6,299 to 1,359, and it is regarded as historians today as just a model of simplicity and brevity. It is in use for only about 15 years, though. Now, why is that Constitution only in use until 1850, only for 15 years? Well, that is because there were a few things going on in Michigan. So the legislator, after just 15 years, calls for a new convention because in 1837, there had been a large banking crisis, which caused all kinds of financial problems within the state. And so there was a really big debate about how to fix these problems. And one of the things people thought is maybe by amending the Constitution, putting more rules in, that would fix the problem. There is also a big push within the state to directly elect more of our executive branch officials. So this is why we're going to do that. Now, the convention is held in the second capital. We've moved our capital to Lansing by this point in time, from June 3rd to August 15th of 1850. If we're looking at who are our delegates, we have 100 delegates. So they're the 100 House seats at the time. You can see Michigan's more organized by this point in time. We have more counties. And so delegates are from more areas, more spread out. If we look here, we can see that we're still mostly farmers in their 30s and 40s, mostly born in New York, and still mostly Democrats. But there's a little bit of evidence of something on the horizon. A few more Whigs than we had at the last convention, and we also have a free soiler. This is somebody who is advocating for there to not be slavery in the Western states. This is a different party, and this is kind of hinting at the fact that pretty soon we're going to have that Civil War, and there's going to be a dramatic shift within politics here in Michigan. Now, one of the interesting things I found out about this one is that we only have one delegate who was actually born in Michigan. There are actually more delegates at the 1835 convention born in Michigan than at the 1851. And that one delegate was Peter DeNoyer. He was born in Detroit, and he worked as a merchant and then is involved in a lot of different political offices. He's treasurer for Wayne County, treasurer for the city of Detroit, and eventually state treasurer. So he's getting involved in the money things. He'll also end up serving on the 1867 ConCon, which will be the next one we talk about. Charles P. Bush is another one of our farmers. He is born in New York, moves to Michigan, and had a 1,700-acre farm in Livingston County. When we talk that people are farmers, they're usually larger areas of land. The small subsistence farmers were not necessarily the folks that are being elected to constitutional conventions. Not out of the question, but mostly it's going to be large landholders that are doing this. He served several terms in the House and Senate and serves as lieutenant governor prior to being elected to the convention. And a couple interesting things about his time in the legislature. He actually cast the deciding vote to move the capital here to Lansing, and he drafted a bill abolishing capital punishment in Michigan. Michigan is the first government in the English-speaking world to abolish the death penalty within the state. And we're actually going to talk about that in a later constitutional convention. Ebenezer Ranalli was born in Vermont. He studied medicine, and this is a time where you did not necessarily have to go to medical school to become a doctor. Now, he did do some studying in classrooms, but he mainly apprenticed with another doctor. He moves to Michigan and serves in the Senate. While he's serving in the Senate, he does fall ill, and actually he is so ill that the rest of the delegates think he's dying. They pack him up in a carriage and send him home, hoping he would survive long enough to make it home. He ends up pulling through, and he is the oldest surviving member of his legislative class. And then he was also actually a delegate at that 1835 ConCon we mentioned earlier. Now, in terms of looking at our standing committees, the big thing I want to point out here is we just have a lot more standing committees. This is going to be a much more detailed constitution, and so there's just far more detail there. Now, the provisions here, we don't actually start our 1850 Constitution with a Bill of Rights. All of the provisions from the 1835 Constitution are there. They just scatter them throughout the whole Constitution under other articles that seem to be somewhat relevant. Voting is the voting provisions allow 21-year-old white men on first papers, and then natives not affiliated with a tribe. So what this means is on first papers means you have indicated you intend to become a citizen. So you don't have to have completed the citizenship process, but you filed that initial paperwork in order to do that. In terms of the executive branch, we set an age limit for the governor of 30. Stevens T. Mason kind of got blamed for that financial panic here in the state of Michigan, and he is the youngest governor to serve any state ever, so they kind of set that age limit at just a little bit older than he was when he was governor, thinking that maybe a little more experience for our governors would be beneficial. We have a lot more elected state officials, and we specifically list salaries for these executive officers. This is going to become a problem in the future, but we'll get to that. In our legislative branch, the Senate has 32 members. The House has between 64 and 100 members elected now to two-year terms. So both House and Senate are two-year terms. They are elected on a general ballot in a House district. So what this means, if you live in a city and your city is entitled to more than one representative, you vote for as many representatives as your city is allocated. So say you're here in Lansing, there are 3 representatives, like population-wise, you are entitled to 3 people. If you go into the polling place, you vote yes on 3 different people, and then the top 3 vote getters become the 3 representatives from that district. We also, our House breakdown is based on a moiety, which is a somewhat complicated mathematical formula, but basically what it says is that any district that has one half of 1% of the population of the state gets a representative. So you go around, you distribute all of those, and then any representatives who are left, those go to your bigger cities. So this is not the age of one person, one vote. We'll get there, but we're not there yet. We have this moiety system. The Supreme Court has 4 members elected to 8-year terms. Vacancies are filled by the governor. And then we get a lot more taxation, finance, and banking laws. Things like we limit the borrowing of the state to $50,000 in terms of total borrowing. It prohibits spending money on internal improvements. There's a change in banking laws, like any change you make to a banking law has to be added to a statewide ballot of voters. The legislator can't make changes to banking laws. That's kind of put in a little bit more safeguards, or so they think. And then shareholders in banks are actually held personally reliable for any losses incurred by those banks. So if you are a shareholder, you're on the line for this if the bank goes under. Another interesting thing about this Constitution is that it has an entire article just on the Upper Peninsula. And this is because at this time, the Upper Peninsula only has about 5,000 people. So all these rules they've set up for all of the different counties and stuff down here in the Lower Peninsula, they just don't make sense. They don't apply. They have an entire different setup for their judicial system in the Upper Peninsula because people are just way more spread out. And so that comes into a whole nother section. That also requires that there's at least one senator and 3 representatives from the Upper Peninsula, and that half of all money paid in taxes by mining corporations have to go to local governments in the Upper Peninsula. So there's just different provisions set up that way. And in terms of amending, we are adding a statewide vote to call a constitutional convention to the ballot every 16 years. If this sounds familiar, it is. We still have that. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. Now, this Constitution does pass by a vote of 36,169 to 9,433, so it is overwhelming again. It is much longer, more specific than the previous Constitution, but is often regarded as far too specific. It is in use for 45 years. It survives 2 attempts to rewrite it. And was amended 51 times. So the next thing we're going to talk about are these 2 attempts to rewrite this Constitution, why they fail. So next time we're going to attempt to write a new Constitution just 17 years later. So we're looking at a rotation about every 15, 17 years. We're looking at writing a new Constitution. So what happens that we're looking at this in 1967? Well, that every 16-year vote comes around and the voters in Michigan say, we need another constitutional convention. And really the main reason is just that the 1850 Constitution was so specific, it was already causing problems. Fixing normal things that, historians will say should have been within legislation, take an entire constitutional amendment. So we say, well, let's just rewrite the thing. Delegates are elected on April 1st, 1867, and it's held in the second Capitol from May 16th to August 22nd. So let's again take a look at our delegates, the delegate breakdown. Again, you see a little bit more settlement, few more development within counties. We have more lawyers for the first time sitting on the Constitutional Convention than farmers. And you can also see there is a dramatic shift towards the Republicans. So this is after the Civil War. And so the Republican Party is formed by those Whigs, the Free Soilers, and anti-slavery Democrats. So it's this coalition party that's formed and then becomes a dominant party within the state of Michigan. Delegates in this Constitutional Convention are a little bit older. We're trending more to the 40s and 50s rather than 30s and 40s. They are still mostly from New York, and a lot of our delegates have served in the legislature prior to being in this convention, so I know a little bit about that legislative procedure. Now, I want to highlight here first Levi T. Hall. He is born in New York. He was orphaned at age 11 and actually apprenticed at a newspaper. He works at the newspapers for over 50 years and actually held many locally elected positions. Robert McClellan, name might be familiar to some. He was a governor, but he also is notable because he serves in the 1835, 1850, and 1867 Constitutional Convention. So he's at all 3 of them. He was born in Pennsylvania, attended Dickinson College, where he graduated the top of his law class. He declined to serve as bank commissioner or attorney general under Stevens T. Mason. So Mason gave him the option of either position, and he said, I'm going to stay in private practice. Thank you very much. So he stays doing that. He served in the House of Representatives. He was Speaker of the House at one point, was the mayor of Monroe, was a congressional representative from the 1st District here in Michigan, and was governor of Michigan, was governor between the 1850 convention and this convention here. And then he's actually also the Secretary of the Interior at that point in time. So he goes on and he is elevated to a lot of different offices, both locally within the state and nationally. And then we'll finish up here with James Birney, who was born in Kentucky. He grew up in Alabama and Kentucky, and his father was actually a presidential candidate with a small party known as the Liberty Party in the 1840s. So again, this is when we have a lot of these smaller parties before a lot of them end up becoming part of that Republican Party. He studied at Centre College and Miami University and was a Greek and Latin professor before deciding to go back and study law. He became a lawyer, but then moved to Michigan to oversee some of his father's investments and got involved in editing one of the first newspapers in Bay City. He serves in the Senate. He serves as a lieutenant governor, but resigns as lieutenant governor to be a circuit court judge. This is all prior to the convention. After the convention, he becomes the U.S. minister to the Netherlands. All right, what kind of committees are we looking at here? Again, we have a lot more committees, and the one I like to highlight here is the traffic in intoxicating liquors. So one thing that's coming up around this time is prohibition and getting rid of alcohol. And so we have an entire committee within this Constitution saying, what should we do here in Michigan about alcohol? Key provisions. So this one would have gone back to that separate Bill of Rights. This would give men over 21 residing in Michigan for 3 months or on first papers the right to vote, and would prohibit the mentally disabled and those convicted of dueling from voting. Now, one thing to point out about this too, with the way that's written, that would have allowed Black men in Michigan the right to vote. This is before the 15th Amendment and is quite controversial at that point in time. Now, it would have lowered the voting age for the governor back down to 25 instead of 30. The Senate would have 32 members, but actually gave permission for them to expand to 33 members after 1870. And the Senate would have switched to 4-year terms at that point in time. House have 110 or fewer members to 2-year terms. And it would have raised the pay for the legislator to $4 a day, but only for actual attendance. So if you are not there, you don't get that pay. In our judicial branch, this was a 5-justice Supreme Court, 4 terms, so 4 different meetings each year in each of the lower peninsula districts, and then the upper peninsula is a separate 5th district. So this takes out the upper peninsula section, but puts those judicial things just within the judicial branch section. And then it would raise the pay of specific officers in our executive branch, and also prohibited internal improvements, except they make an exception for the Sulaks. Now, this Constitution does fail on a vote of 71,733 to 110,582. And the main reasons are increase in legislative and executive pay and enfranchising Black men. Like I said, that was a very controversial provision, and it actually does get voted down. Now, the next time we try and revise our Constitution is just about 5 years later. And this one's a little bit more interesting because it is not a convention, it is a constitutional commission. And there's some question about the legality around this. So what happens is our Constitution lays out that the legislator can propose a new Constitution at that point in time. What the legislator does is they pass a joint resolution, says to the governor, you appoint a commission, have the commission study this, write us a new Constitution, refer it back to us, and then we'll refer that to the voters. So the commission is formed. They meet in the Senate chamber in the second Capitol from August 27th, 1873 to October 16th, 1873. That comprised of 39 actual meetings that they held over that time period. The rules of the commission stated that each provision put into the new Constitution had to be approved by 2/3 of the members. So not more than half, but 2/3, which is a little bit of a higher threshold than our conventions were. And again, the resulting document was sent to the governor, who forwarded it to the legislator, and then the people would vote on it. So who is on this commission? It's a small enough number. We can list all their names right here on the screen. 2 delegates from each congressional district appointed by the governor. And what is the background of these men? Well, they are mostly lawyers. We are at the point where it's a commission. These are people that are really prominent. They're not elected. They're appointed. So the governor is going to look for people that are lawyers, but he is going to nod to the farmers too. So we've got 3 bigger farmers, and actually some of those lawyers had some involvement with farming as well. Still, most of our delegates are going to be born in New York. They're all married at this point in time, mostly in their 40s and 50s, and a little bit more of an even breakdown between Democrats and Republicans, but still a Republican majority. Most had served, or about half had served in the legislature prior. So who are these people? Lyman Mason, first of all, is born in Massachusetts. He moves to California in 1850 and gets involved in many different business ventures. Eventually, he'll move to Muskegon, where he's involved in lumbering, railroads, and banking. and he runs for quite a few offices. He is elected locally, but as he's a Democrat, he has a really difficult time making a transition to statewide politics. He was actually a candidate for governor for the Democratic Party against Governor Bagley, who appointed him to the commission after he lost to him. So again, he's really prominent within the party. It makes sense to have him on this commission, but he had lost the race to Governor Bagley before being appointed. Charles Upson was born in Connecticut, studied law at Yale before moving to Michigan. He was a teacher and deputy clerk before being admitted to the bar. And he served in a lot of public offices as well. He's county clerk, prosecuting attorney. He serves in Congress. He was a circuit court judge. And then after being on the commission, he becomes mayor of Coldwater and was in the Michigan Senate. I also want to talk about Hezekiah Wills briefly. He was born in Ohio, attended Kenyon College, and was admitted to the Ohio bar before he moves to Michigan. He is actually the youngest delegate to the 1835 Constitutional Convention, so another one of these people who served on multiple conventions. He ran for Congress multiple times, helped organize the 25th Michigan Infantry during the Civil War. So again, with the 1867 and 1873 groups being pretty soon after the Civil War, a lot of the delegates are going to have some sort of a Civil War connection. He is also president of the Michigan Pioneer and Historical Society. And if you want to hear more about that organization, that's Val's topic next month. So come on back and hear about that group. After being on the commission, he had a really interesting job. He actually goes to Washington, D.C., and he is a federal judge overseeing claims from England resulting from contracts they had formed with southern states during the Civil War. So kind of controversial and interesting there. Now, what kind of provisions do we have? We do not have committees because there's only 18 people. So there's not really a same committee process. So here, again, we're going to do the Bill of Rights at the beginning, voting for males over 21 years old, voting allowed on first papers. And this is no longer controversial because we've passed the 15th Amendment nationally, so Black men already have the right to vote in Michigan. So this is not going to be the poison pill for this one. The executive branch, not many changes from the 1850 Constitution, really. Here in the legislative section, again, 32-member Senate that could expand to 33 members, but this time after 1875, because we're already past 1870, so they changed that up a little bit, switched the Senate to 4-year terms with half expiring every 2 years. 110 or fewer members in the House, and this would have gotten rid of the general ballot. It would have had single-member districts. That, again, is something that we'll talk a little bit more about later because this one doesn't pass. Again, it would pay members $4. So a lot of these things that the 1867 Constitutional Commission came up with, they're also putting in this one as well. One of the interesting things, though, is that this one would specifically list 19 different such situations the legislators could not pass laws about. Now, some of these provisions will date back to the 1835 Constitution. Things like the legislator is not allowed to pass a law granting somebody a divorce. That's just like not within their purview. But this also adds a lot of other things like the inability to declare somebody old enough to be of age, changing the order of inheritance, or changing the course of a road determined by a road commission. So many of these things seem to be things that are better suited for the judiciary or a commission that's already set up somewhere else in government and saying, don't meddle in these types of things, legislator, these other groups, that's their purview. The judicial branch would have been a Supreme Court of 5 justices appointed to 10-year terms. This one would not have specifically listed the salaries of state officials. Again, no internal improvements except the sulaks. And it would have added into the Constitution that one of the ways to amend the Constitution would be through a constitutional commission appointed by the governor. Surprise, they wanted this to actually be a way you could amend the Constitution. The thing for them, though, unfortunately, it wasn't a provision of the Constitution yet. And this overwhelmingly fails because people think it's unconstitutional, which it kind of was. So this one does fail, again, with a vote of 39,285 to 124,034 votes, which brings us finally to a successful constitutional convention. The Constitution of 1908 or 1909, depending on who you are and what you prefer. Most historians call this the Constitution of 1908, but if you actually go back and pull the actual legislation, it says 1909 on the top because it goes into effect January 1st of 1909, even though it's voted on in 1908. I have always known it as 1908, so you're getting 1908 from me tonight. So in this instance, the legislator actually called for a convention. They first introduced with House Bill 577. The House and Senate, though, had different ideas of how the convention should actually be organized. How are we electing delegates, things like that. And so there's a lot of substitutions back and forth, and eventually they end up just calling a joint convention where they sit some representatives, some senators in the room and kind of iron out the details and then vote on it from there. That bill then becomes PA 272 of 1907 when it is signed into law on June 27th. The delegates were elected on September 17th in a special election. What they ended up deciding was that 3 delegates were elected from each Senate district on a general ballot. So again, what we were saying where we're electing multiple people from the same district, you vote for 3 people. That's what's going on with this one. They meet in the House chamber in the 3rd Capitol in Lansing from October 22nd, 1907 to March 3rd, 1908. Now, when I talk about the general ballot, there's one story I want to tell here that kind of describes the way that this can get a little bit complicated. And this is to do with what is at that point the 24th district, I believe, comprised of Bay City, Saginaw, and Midland counties. Now, Bay City and Saginaw counties had far more people living in them than Midland County, but Midland County thought it would make more sense if there was a delegate from each of the counties. So officials within Midland County encouraged their residents to not vote for 3 people, but only vote for 1, only vote for that Midland delegate, thereby denying the Bay City and Saginaw delegates those additional votes and upping the Midland delegate. And lo and behold, we have a Bay City, a Saginaw, and a Midland delegate. So there's ways to game out a general ballot that are a little bit different than when you're talking 1 person, 1 vote. And so that's something I just wanted to point out with this kind of a setup for calling our constitutional convention. Now, again, overwhelmingly lawyers, this is going to be the case from this point on. Kind of makes sense when you're electing folks that have a little bit more of an idea of what of how to draft legislation. This is the first time we actually have a little bit of a better idea of the educational background of the delegates. More of them have gone to college, 44 to U of M here. And then you'll see that red law. There are some delegates here that, again, the same way doctors could apprentice with another physician, lawyers could apprentice with another lawyer and read law and pass the bar that way. For the first time, most of our delegates are born in Michigan. Again, we're still overwhelmingly Republican here. All conventions will be mostly married men or mostly married folks on the commission. So who are we going to talk about this time? First, James Foote Barnett, who is probably one of the most well-educated members of this convention. He started off in Grand Rapids Public Schools. He went to an academy in Massachusetts, then Yale, Columbia, and then New York Law School. And he becomes an expert in international law. He had one of the most extensive private law libraries in the state, mostly dealing with international law, published many academic articles, but was most well known for an article titled International Agreements Without the Advice and Consent of the Senate. He wrote this after President Theodore Roosevelt intervened in Santo Domingo. This was over a debt crisis they were having with Europe, and he kind of intervened with what some people call like almost an update to the Monroe Doctrine. And so Foote Barnett writes a little bit on that and is well known for that. One of the things he's most well known for in terms of the convention is he advocates for a popular initiative, which means the people can write a petition to have amendments added to the ballot. This is pretty controversial between the delegates, and he actually negotiates to get the 2 sides to a common meeting ground where we do end up with a popular initiative in the Constitution as a method of amending. He also ends up doing a lot of things with business as well later on in his career. Now, John C. Carton, if you were with us in July for the cemetery tour, this is Augustus Carton's brother. So I mentioned him just very briefly, but he attended Flushing High School, worked as a farmer, a clerk, and a teacher before he was hired as a bookkeeper. He was elected clerk of Genesee County and then decided, well, why not study law while I have this job? And so he studies law at that point in time. He forms a partnership with George H. Durand and becomes Durand City Attorney for 2 years. And then he's elected to the House of Representatives and becomes Speaker of the House. And because of his experience in this, he is overwhelmingly elected as the president of the Constitutional Convention, so helps run the convention. And then I want to talk briefly too about Lawton Hemans, who is born in New York but moves to Michigan when he's still an infant. He attends Eaton Rapids High School and University of Michigan Law. He practiced law in Mason and was elected mayor of Mason when he was only 27. He worked in the House of Representatives, but why we like him around here is that he was also a historian and author. He wrote a book called The History of Michigan, and he wrote one about the life and times of Stevens T. Mason after staring up at the Stevens T. Mason portrait in the House chamber of the Capitol. After the Constitutional Convention, he runs for governor of Michigan, but he is a Democrat, and we are still in an era of strong Republican control, so he does not become governor, but he does end up becoming chairman of the Railroad Commission for a few years. Now, if we look at our standing committees again, nice long list here. We still have liquor traffic as being an issue we're discussing. But we also have things like public lands and reforestation. This is going to be an issue because of all of the massive forest fires we've had in Michigan in the 1880s and 1890s as a result of logging practices. We also see a public services corporation. So we now have things like telephones and electricity and things like that. And so we're needing to look at how are we going to regulate these utilities. And so we end up setting up commissions for that. Now, what do we end up in that 1908 Constitution? Males over 21 years, they can vote on first papers. Native Americans not affiliated with a tribe, and just a little bit of voting for women. Women who own with taxable property can vote on financial matters. For the previous several constitutional conventions and commissions, the women of Michigan had been petitioning, saying, please, please let us vote. And we get a little bit here, but it's not till 1918 that women are able to vote on everything here in the state of Michigan. So little step forward. In terms of the executive branch, there is a line item veto on appropriation bills for the first time. Secretary of State gets added in order of succession. So prior to this, it was governor, lieutenant governor, and president pro tempore of the Senate. This is saying, okay, we have these other elected offices. Let's have a statewide elected office be the next in line. And then this still will list specific salaries, but it again raises those salaries to kind of a livable wage again, which is the problem we keep having is as time goes on, that compensation is getting less and less because of inflation. In terms of the legislator, apportionment is essentially the same as in the 1850 Constitution. They change up how pay is working, $800 for regular session, and then $5 a day for a special session up to 20 days. After the 20 days, no additional pay. And then there is also a law, or it's also put in the Constitution that the legislator cannot pass a specific act when a general act can work. So prior to this, the legislator could pass a bill saying, Lansing has to do this, or Grand Rapids has to do that. Now we can say things like, cities over 50,000 people have to have this regulation, but you can't single out a specific locality anymore. And actually, if you go back and look at old journals from legislative sessions, there is a public acts and also often a local acts for each year that kind of distinguish between the two. Those go away. You have to have general laws. The judicial branch section does not set a specific number of justices, so we change those all the time over the next period of time here. And then we do get some more changes in regards to cities and villages besides this provision of general laws. One of the biggest things is municipal home rule for cities and villages. Now, what does that mean? It means that cities and villages can write charters for themselves outlining what their government looks like as long as they're within certain guidelines set out by the state. So the state's not writing all of your laws for the city, you and the villages, you can do a little bit of that yourself. You can find a structure that makes most sense for your locality. And then we have a big change here because, also municipal governments can own utilities. So Board of Water and Light, anyone? That makes this a thing that's possible. Big change is in terms of internal improvements. We no longer prohibit internal improvements here. In fact, we encourage internal improvements. And part of this is due to the Good Roads movement, because roads are really bad in Michigan and all over the country. And so there's a nationwide push to improve roads and to invest in road improvement. And so we're saying, yeah, we maybe shouldn't prohibit this anymore. We're going to encourage it. The state can take out loans, but those loans can't exceed $250,000. So we raise that amount from $50,000 to $250,000. As more colleges have been established, they're specifically mentioned in the Constitution. Again, we have that initiative petition I mentioned. It eliminates a state census. We used to have a statewide census in addition to the national census. We say, the federal one's good enough. We no longer do a state census. And then a lot of those banking provisions were deleted that had been in the 1850 Constitution. And the reason for that is because coming out of the Civil War, we have a nationalized currency and like federalized banks. So we don't need to worry about these wildcat banks and the same kind of banking scandals that we had, why we added those provisions in the first place. Now, this does pass by a vote of 244,705 to 130,783. It's in use for 55 years, amended 69 times. And this is my one really big bit of speculation, but it was too cool of a picture to not put it up. So this picture we have here is dated somewhere around 1906, 07, 08. We don't actually know which group is in here, but up in the back corner, there's a whole group of women sitting in the back corner. And when you count the number of women, it's only 2 fewer than the number of female secretaries that served for the convention. So my speculation, again, just speculation, is this could be the support staff for the Constitutional Convention. It might not be, but this is also what the chamber would have looked like either way. So there's my bit of speculation for today. And that brings us to our current Constitution, the Constitution of 1963. So how do we get to this one? Well, we're going back to that every 16-year vote in order to come up with our Constitutional Convention in 63. But we have a little bit of a problem because that every 16-year vote says that it has to be a majority of the people voting in order to pass and help form a new constitutional convention. Now, we keep getting the majority of people voting on the question, wanting to amend the Constitution and hold the Constitutional Convention, but so many people are leaving that question blank that it fails over and over and over. So in 1960, there is something called the Gateway Amendment. This is going to change the language from over half of voters voting on the election to over half of voters voting on the question in order to pass and form a new constitutional convention. That Gateway Amendment does pass pretty narrowly, actually. The vote to have a convention also passes quite narrowly. And why do we want to call the convention? Well, there have been a series of different study committees looking into our Constitution back in the 1940s and the 1950s. They've made a ton of recommendations, things like consolidating executive agencies, having longer term lengths for our executive officers in the Senate, and expanding. And we have just a lot more people living in Michigan, so we need more services, and we need to figure out how to really just modernize our government at the time. And there's a general dissatisfaction about that legislative apportionment, the moiety, is people are getting a little irritated about that, and especially as more and more people are moving to cities, and it's seen as something disadvantaging the cities. So we hold an election, and again, the provisions of this Constitutional Convention are that delegates are selected the same way your legislators are selected. So we get 1 member from each current House district, 1 member from each Senate district. There is a new kind of body for this Constitutional Convention called the Constitutional Convention Preparatory Commission, which is formed and writes a bunch of white paper studies on different topics that are likely to come up during the Constitutional Convention. So our delegates show up and they have a lot of reading material to kind of get their head around what are the different major issues. This convention is not held in one of our capitals, but was at the Lansing Civic Center a few blocks away from here. And this is because the House chamber was needed for session because the convention went from October 2nd, 1961 to August 1st of 1962. If you take a look, again, here we have our delegates, and actually we have all of the counties we currently have our counties here. I talked about a concern about malapportionment related to the cities. And if you look and you say, but Wayne County has 45 people, that seems like enough, right? 45 people is actually 31% of convention delegates. Wayne County had 35% of the population of Michigan. So if this was a one person, one vote situation, they'd be entitled to another 3 to 4 delegates in this convention from that county alone. So this is kind of showing how that moiety kind of affected things within representation in the legislature, but then also in our constitutional conventions. Now, what are our delegates like? Again, mostly lawyers. Delegates are trending a little bit older, mostly in their 50s or 60s, or 40s, 50s, and 60s. And we actually have 10 delegates in their 70s to this convention. Their majority are born in Michigan, and we still have a bit of a Republican majority. About 2/3 were Republicans for this convention. And then one thing I definitely want to point out, we have women and African Americans at the convention for the first time of any of our conventions. And so we're going to see a few changes policy-wise resulting from this. Now, delegates I want to highlight first, Frank A. Belcher, who's born in Arkansas, and his parents moved to what was then the Oklahoma Territory, where he grows up. He attends the University of Oklahoma for his undergrad degree, and the University of Warsaw, Poland, where he got his master's, because you see, he served in both World War I and World War II, and he knew Polish. So he worked as a translator in World War I, translating Army manuals. After the war is done, he is asked by a friend he had met at the University of Oklahoma to work for the Polish Ministry of War. This friend was actually in the Polish government by this point in time. So he stays, he works from 1921 to 1922, and while he's working for the Polish Ministry of War, he is actually requested to translate the United States Constitution into Polish for their Constitutional Convention delegates to use as a model when drafting the Polish Constitution. So he has a very, very small role to play in drafting the Polish Constitution after World War I. When he comes back to the United States, he becomes a high school social studies teacher. This is a career he pursues over 30 years, and it's actually his students that circulate the petition for him to become a Constitutional Convention delegate. He is one of the older delegates at age of 71 and was actually the first delegate to pass away following the convention, just a few years after the convention was done. I also want to highlight one of our female delegates, Dorothy Judd. She's born in Michigan. She attended Vassar and taught high school in Grand Rapids and was very, very active in the League of Women Voters. In the 1930s, she was appointed by Frank Fitzgerald to the Civil Service Commission and fought to pass statewide civil service reform. She's actually also going to be on that commission after the Constitutional Convention. Romney actually appoints her back to that commission again. And the reason I think she's interesting, or one of the reasons I think she's so interesting, is she is one of only 2 female delegates who had to apply for a Social Security number in order to be paid for her work in the Constitutional Convention. She was born before Social Security was a thing. Even the job she held was before Social Security came in. She was actually listed as a homemaker, even with all of this information on the stats for the Constitutional Convention. And then I also want to highlight one of our Black delegates, Richard Austin. He is born in Alabama. His father died when he was 11, and his mother moved them up to Michigan. He worked shining shoes as a kid. They were quite poor. He graduated from Cass Tech, went on to Wayne State on a scholarship, but even with the scholarship was unable to afford to continue there. So he ended up working full-time and then taking night classes at Detroit Institute of Technology, and he became the first Black CPA in Michigan. his election to the Constitutional Convention really launches his political career. After that, he is on the State Board of Equalization, the Wayne County Board of Supervisors, the Michigan Commission on Legislative Apportionment, and he's also Secretary of State from 1970 to 1995. So he is the first Black Secretary of State of any state and the longest serving Secretary of State in Michigan history. If we look at committees, there are a lot fewer committees. That also means that the committees are going to be much larger. That's going to be one of the criticisms of the convention, actually, is the committee sizes were a little bit unwieldy. But they're all your pretty normal ones we've seen on almost every other list. There's none of those kind of fun, odd, specific ones that we're looking at. Now, key provisions. We still have that Declaration of Rights, but we're going to add an equal protection clause. And this is equal protection for race, religion, color, and national origin. Actually, sex was a really debated topic during this. A lot of the female delegates were very in support of that. It does not get included, though, ultimately, kind of a last-minute vote off on the floor. In terms of voting, every citizen over 21 is now allowed to vote. We have our executive branch 4-year terms, and our order of succession is now governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general. There are over 120 departments, boards, and commissions in state government when this begins. Those are going to be consolidated into only 20 departments. This was one of the big pushes to streamline government. Treasurer and auditor general are no longer elected. And we are now saying there will be a governor's residence in Lansing, and the state is going to provide that. So the governor's house becomes a thing. In terms of the legislature, 38 members to 4-year terms. Apportionment is required every 10 years on a formula I am not going to get into, because in the middle of the convention, the Supreme Court rules on Baker v. Carr, which actually does cause the convention to tweak some things timeline. This is where we're going to start to get, it's that Baker v. Carr says that you can sue for discrimination based on malapportionment within malapportionment and underrepresentation. So they switched the timeline to hold our first redistricting for the Senate. But just 2 years after the convention, there is another court case, Reynolds versus Simmons, which is the one that requires one person, one vote. And so within 2 years after this, that whole equation is gone anyway. So I'm not going to get into that too much here, but they do still have a weird equation for the Senate that takes into account geographic boundaries and population. House was 110 members, 2-year terms based on population. And this prohibits making a law establishing the death penalty in Michigan. So Michigan abolished the death penalty way back 1840s, but it's being repeatedly brought up and introduced as new legislation. This is just going to be an additional safeguard saying, nope, Michigan is not reinstituting the death penalty. We also established a Civil Rights Commission to hear claims against that Equal Protection Act. County home rule. So we talked about municipal, city, and village home rule. This gets extended to counties too. So counties can write a charter as long as they're in keeping with what the Constitution says. Community colleges get a mention for the first time because those have become a thing. 2-year community colleges get put into our Constitution. When we're talking taxes and finance, the Constitution prohibits a graduated income tax, limits sales tax to 4%, and instead of setting a specific cap on the amount of money the state's allowed to borrow, they set up a formula to determine what the state's allowed to borrow, so we don't keep running into this inflation, money doesn't mean as much as it used to situation. Now, this Constitution passes by a vote of 810,860 to 803,436. So again, very narrow margins. It has been in use up to this time for 63 years and has been amended 39 times. Now, we don't have time to watch all of this, but I do want to play just a few seconds of a video I found. This is a documentary called Michigan Can Lead the Way. It was put together by U of M, MSU, and Wayne State. And it was put together to be used in classrooms, but was actually also used by the State Department when teaching other countries about forming constitutions. So this is kind of, let's see if we can get this going. And if we have, oh, and you know what? I don't know that the volume is working so well on this. We actually are going to have a series of links up on our website. And so if you want to watch, again, it's a 30-minute documentary, so we don't have time to watch it all anyways. But this gives you a little bit of an idea of what that convention hall looks like. And if you go, you can watch the whole documentary. I think we'll have that posted within the next day or two. But you can kind of see it talks a little bit about the committee process and how the delegate process worked in order to form that Constitution. So let's move on just briefly here. So the question I'm sure folks have is, when is our next Constitutional Convention? We've now currently had our Constitution for the longest of any of the constitutions. Well, it is on the ballot this year. So at that every 16-year provision, when you go to vote this year, it will be there. Now, whether the people of Michigan vote to hold a Constitutional Convention, that is up to the people of Michigan. So the answer is, it's up to you. With that, any questions? I know that was kind of a lot all together, but any questions? Yes. Right. I could go back through and double check. I don't know how much they were specifically made. I can tell you the 1863 convention, including salaries, renovating the convention center, renovating it back, office supplies, session staff, and all of that cost $2 million, a little over $2 million for the state. So that's something to keep in mind when you go to the polls to vote. It costs $2 million. And if the people vote no with the resulting constitution, you just keep the old one. So, yeah, but I'm trying to think if any of these offhand had the salaries listed. I've got a bunch of journals up here, and I'm trying to remember if I know really quickly how to find the wage, and offhand, I'm not sure. I think they were getting, actually, I take that back. Most were getting comparable wages to what legislators were making. So if it was $3 a day, it's $3 a day. When we change that around, that's about what they were making for those conventions. Yes, exactly. Yeah, it is a commitment to timing wise. Any other questions?
Do you know why they were opposed to internal
improvements? So the reason they're opposed to the internal improvements, so a lot of the issues from that financial panic in 1837 were the state took out a $5 million loan to pay for internal improvements, railroads and canals. Now, it's a little complicated because why Stephen T. Mason gets blamed is he had signed a promissory note for $5 million. The state itself, I believe, only was distributed about somewhere between 1.5 and 3 million. We did not get the full amount. The promissory note had been signed. We got an initial payment, and then the bank went under. The bank sold the note to a European bank who thought we had gotten the full amount of money. So that bank went after the state of Michigan for the full $5 million. And Michigan's credit on an international front is seen as just absolutely, we have no credit anymore because in the minds of European bankers, have proved that we will not pay back our debts. And so it takes decades over a decade to recover from that financial hit. We eventually end up negotiating with those banks. This is at the same point in time. This is really a nationwide and international panic. A lot of other states are doing similar things, taking out money for internal improvements. And as more and more states are defaulting, I think it was something like 9 states default, but this is a time when we only have, that's a little over half of the states, or a little less than half the states in the country are defaulting to European bankers. So the prohibition against internal improvements was seen as a safeguard against repeating the same mistake. Yeah. Any other questions?
Another convention.
Yes.
What is the status of citizen amendments to the current Constitution?
So if there's another constitution, what is the status of these citizen initiative citizen initiative amendments to the Constitution. So if there is another constitutional convention, everything's on the table. We're rewriting the entire thing. All of those things that were added to the previous Constitution, they're up for debate again. It would be 148 people that we elect to go into constitutional convention. They get to rewrite the whole thing. And if the people like it, they vote yes and approve it. If they don't, they vote no and we stick with what we've got. But everything's on the table. And if the people that are elected say, oh, those things the people wanted, we don't agree with them, they're gone. So, and on adding or keeping the initiative petition within the Constitution, again, that's up to those people drafting that Constitution, whether they say, this is a way we still want to amend our Constitution, or they say, you know, the people have added too many things we don't like. We're going to take that away. We're going to just have this more representative form of government where we are representing the people. It's less of that direct people putting it on the ballot. That could happen too. So I'm not saying it will, but everything is on the table. If we call a constitutional convention, it's a complete rewrite and everything is on the table. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
The 19th photograph, what's the Dutch mafia?
What's the Dutch mafia in that 1960s photograph? Let me go back and see if we can pull that one back up. So the Dutch mafia was a group of like the greater Grand Rapids area delegates to the Constitutional Convention. Again, there's a strong Dutch population in that Holland, Grand Rapids area. So they called themselves the Dutch Mafia. Yes. So, you know, these little like groups of people that form together and have, various committees and groups that they say, yeah, like, let's team up. We like the same things. We're from the same area. That's what that was. All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. If, again, Pioneer and Historical Society is next month, and do we have a date on that offhand? Yes. I don't remember off the top of my head. So we'll let Val, who has it in her calendar, let everyone know what date that will be.
That will be March 24th.
March 24th will be the next evening program. Thank you all. Yep. Yeah.